Hello, insatiable listeners. Season 6 is now complete. We are on a break in between seasons. I'll return on Wednesday, February 13th with a new theme and a big surprise. I can't wait to share it with you. I am so bad at surprises. So let's just say that if you love the type of conversations we have here, rabbit holes and experimenting, you're going to love it. In the meantime, enjoy these podcast interviews I've done recently. They are quite a range of topics, but hey, you know that's how we roll here. And there will be a few classic episodes leading up to season 7 that will help you get the most out of the season and a clue about the theme. Also, if you enjoy the show or have benefited from it, I'd so appreciate a review. You guys totally rallied this summer to get us to over 100. We're currently at 105, and I would love for us to get to 150 by spring. It really helps the show as it makes it easier for others to find it. And I'd like to read 2 recent reviews. This one from Insatiable Listener, and her review, or his, was more smash the patriarchy than light and love. If you want trite, simplistic solutions to health and wellness, this is not the podcast for you. You won't find bad diets or tidy Instagrammable quotes, but that's why it's amazing. Allie has a gift for interviewing that brings out her subject's authentic wisdom. It's perfect if you're curious about how to be healthier in all senses of the word, appreciate the nuance and complexity of our unique bodies, or if you just want to hear smart people talking to each other about how to navigate and destroy cultural systems and reassess our collective values. Thank you so much for that 5-star review, Insatiable Listener. Love that you're into reassessing our collective values. And another one that I'll share from Design Lover 757997. Nuanced, Smart, and Sassy too is the title of her 5-star review. She says, I'm exhausted of the constant unhealthy messages that barrage us everywhere from Instagram feeds. Seriously, those people with the super round butts, they don't tell you it's implants. To our diet culture in general. Insatiable is my personal weapon of resistance against those messages. It's balanced, intelligent, and Allie, the host of the podcast, brings in some of the most interesting people I've heard in podcast interviews. Look, if you want to break free from rigid rules but still live a healthy and balanced life, Insatiable can help you carve out your own path. No rules, no dogma, just thoughtful new ways of seeing and being in the world. Thank you so much, Design Lover 757997. And I'll be reading some more in some upcoming episodes. If you have time or, again, have benefited from the podcast, here's how you can leave a review. You launch Apple's podcast app. You tap the search tab, and you enter the name of the podcast you want to rate or review, in this case, Insatiable. Tap the blue search key at the bottom right. Tap the album art for the podcast. Tap the reviews tab, and then tap write a review at the bottom. And if you don't have time for that, if you could just rate it, how many stars you would rate it. That is also super helpful as well. And thank you for being a listener. Having stimulating conversations is what I most treasure in my life. And I get to have them here. And then with you on Instagram, where I connect with so many of you through your emails and also with our guests. It's a joy I cherish deeply. Look forward to seeing you back here in a couple of weeks for new episodes on Wednesday, February 13th. And in the meantime, enjoy these recent interviews and classic episodes.
You're listening to the Medium Well podcast with me, Sarah Weinreb, your host and your guinea pig. Here on Medium Well, I document my adventures and misadventures with navigating transitions, embracing uncertainty, and figuring out what the heck it means to be a human on this very fine and often super confusing planet. Join along as I openly speak to everyone from spiritual guides to career coaches, accomplished entrepreneurs and healers, consultants, and creatives, all in hopes of finding my way to Medium Well. Well, hello there. Welcome back to the Medium Well podcast. And if you're new here, welcome. I am so thrilled that you are here and honored to be in your earbuds as I use myself as a guinea pig to figure out this little thing called life and talk to some really incredible, amazing people. And this week's guest is no exception to that rule. But before I get to this week's guest, I just wanted to do a little bit of recap on the past several episodes. So it's 2019. It's pretty amazing. I have just like this really positive feeling about 2019. I feel like 2018 for almost everyone I know is just like a total shit show. And 2019, that's the year. I just feel like this is going to be a great year. But anyway, I digress. During the holidays, I found myself not listening to my podcast, not keeping up, because I was trying to be present with my family and friends. I was traveling. I was eating a lot of Christmas cookies. Turns out that's really a thing. I'm Jewish. I didn't know that like Christmas cookies were legit. So in case you are not caught up on Medium Well, I just wanted to give you a little insight into the past several episodes so you know what to look back for if you're interested. So last week's episode 12, was with Ali Mahler. It was all about community, finding community, building community, why there's more community and connectedness than ever, but we're lonelier than ever. And all these really interesting tidbits about community that I've never really thought about so in depth. So that was a really cool and interesting conversation. Episode 11 was with Hillary Perlson of The Dreamery. And that was really a reflective episode where we learned about Hillary's story, her health diagnosis, and how that really changed the trajectory of her career and her life, and dove into the importance of simplicity and turning inwards, looking at what you need for yourself and finding clarity. Episode 10 was really, really cool. I got to interview Jody Berg, who's the CEO and president of Vitamix. And she not only runs Vitamix, but she also studied and got her PhD all about purpose. And so we dove into finding and defining your purpose and all things around purpose, personal purpose, purpose in the workplace, how that increases your productivity, your happiness, all of that. So definitely really relevant to this conversation of transitions and figuring things out, purpose, and she helps you really nail down how to find that purpose. And then the last one I just want to recap is episode 9. So that came out on December 19th, and I interviewed Emma Lowy and Lindsay Kellner. They're editors at Mind Body Green, and they co-authored the Spirit Almanac, and we spoke about a whole range of things, including what it's like to be a writer full-time, how media is changing, and what this kind of mishmash of journalism and blogging and all of that means, and what it means for writers and what it means for readers. And then we dove into their new book, The Spirit Almanac, and talked about rituals and spiritual rituals and how to stay grounded and are they real and do they work and all of that. So if any of those tickle your fancy or the 8 before them, this is only episode 13, so it's easy to binge and catch up. Take a listen. But I don't want to keep you away from this guest any longer, this week's guest, because she's truly incredible. Ali Shapiro is our guest for this week, and she is a holistic nutritionist, integrated health coach, and a rebel with a serious cause. She also created her own system called Truce with Food. So it's pretty cool that she has her completely own and really unique system to create change and to approach food, not from just what should you eat or how much should you eat or calories or anything like that, which you'll hear all about in this episode, but from a change perspective. So that's what we dove into this week. We talked about change as a health tool. We talked about how we can redefine our inner critic as really an inner protector and not being so harsh on it. We talked about, in that vein, how to recognize behaviors that are sabotaging our goals, how to reduce stress by recognizing emotional patterns. And then we talked about a lot about the wellness industry and how complex it's become and how we don't need a million supplements, how we really just need to connect to our inner needs. We need to simplify. We need to connect to nature more, get more sunlight, and really return to these basics. And Ali, in this episode, outlined a whole process to get there and how to recognize these behaviors and really get to the root cause of why we're not getting what we want, whether that's with food, whether that's with career, whether that's with anything, any habit. It was a really powerful episode. I love when I talk to people who just have a very different perspective, and it's not the same voice I hear over and over again on the internet, on Instagram, in my everyday life. It's just a new perspective. So I know you're going to love this episode as much as I do. And without further ado, here's episode 13 with Ali Shapiro. This episode of Medium Well is brought to you by Soom Foods, a sister-owned Philadelphia-based company that sells the most delicious, nutritious, and versatile kitchen ingredients. I have been obsessed with their tahini for a very long time. I use it in baking and in savory applications. I make dressings, but I am so excited about their new product. It's a Ceylon date syrup, which is a syrup literally made from one ingredient, dates. The dates are steamed and pressed and made into this syrup that you can drizzle on your oatmeal or put in your morning coffee or elixir. You can blend it into a smoothie without worrying about having those chunks of dates you get sometimes when you try to blend a date in and it just doesn't go well. So it's a great sweetener that is just a fruit. It's delicious. I love it. It's also really nutritious. It has health benefits of lots of magnesium, potassium, manganese, copper, iron, vitamins A, C, D, and B. It is really high in soluble fiber, so it is such a great sweetener option, and you could substitute it in most recipes or any applications of maple syrup, honey, molasses, whatever your favorite drizzly sweeteners are. I love this product. I use it multiple times a day. I love putting it in my morning elixirs. One of my favorite things to do lately is to put it on a gluten-free toast with some peanut butter or their tahini and just drizzle the Ceylon on. It is addicting. I know you're going to love it. You can use the code MEDIUMWELL, that's just the name of this podcast, MEDIUMWELL, at checkout, one word, and that gets you 10% off your entire order of all their products with their tahini, their Ceylon date syrup, and their addictive chocolate sweet tahini halva spread, which I can't keep in the house because I eat it with a spoon. I hope you love their products as much as I do. Let me know how you're using them. I could always use some more inspiration. Enjoy the rest of the episode. Wow, I'm really excited to be chatting today about so many things related to change and our mental blocks and our relationship to wellness and food and all of that. We previously had a really great discussion on some of these topics, and I'm excited to continue that on air and share it with all the listeners. So thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Sarah.
Yeah. So I would love to just start with a little bit of, I find that a lot of the guests that I have on this podcast, maybe just because they resonate with me and I relate to them, have a little bit of a health story themselves that has led them to where they are today. So I would love for you to start, and I know that's the case with you. So I would love for you to start just with that. Like, how did you get into health and nutrition, and what is kind of your backstory with your own health journey that led you here?
Yeah. My mom grew up on a organic farm. It wasn't called organic at the time. It was just a farm. Everything used to be organic back in the 40s and 50s. And my grandmother always believed in nutrition. And my dad was a health and phys ed teacher. So, and fascinated by the body and very into exercise. So I was primed for all of that stuff. But, when you're a teenager, especially as a girl, and you're struggling with your weight, you miscorrelate health and weight, right? And so my focus really was weight loss and that's how I viewed nutrition for a while. And then I guess I'll start at the age of 23. I basically felt very lost in my life. My career I had a really great career on paper, traveling, living abroad in Paris, traveling all over the world, and on a prestigious corporate trajectory, but my health was really failing me in many ways. And I went to the doctor at the age of 23 and I was emotionally eating at night. I was clinically depressed. And I went to her hoping that my weight gain was because of my thyroid issue, which now I'm so glad there's not something wrong with my thyroid. But at the time I was just looking for something. And, basically, while I was waiting for the results from the thyroid exam and the physical, I saw my chart, and I don't know how you feel, Sarah, but like I had this massive medical chart for being 23, but it felt like, even though it was my records, it was like, that's the authorities. I can't look at it, but I looked at it and I just saw all my health challenges. And so, I had asthma as a child. When I was 13, I went through cancer treatments. So my chemotherapy, my radiation was there, all the skin issues I had. I was diagnosed with depression, all the antidepressants I had been cycling through that they didn't I didn't get better. I don't know if they were working, but I wasn't getting better. I wasn't necessarily getting worse. It felt worse in many ways. I was diagnosed with irritable bowel syndrome with my first job out of corporate, transitioning from college to corporate. And I basically like looked at this chart and I was like, wow, I don't have cancer, but I am not healthy. And it made me realize I had been defining health as like being free of cancer, which is an amazing and grateful place to be, but it's also like a very limited definition, right? And so basically the doctor told me my thyroid was okay and that like I should try to, eat less, move more, and recommended salmon recipe with Splenda in it. And I was like, okay, I know as a cancer survivor that
Oh my
like Splenda is a carcinogen in independent research studies. So it set me off on this like I'm not getting well. Fast forward, I studied at the Institute for Integrative Nutrition. I mentored in functional medicine for 4 years. And I was able to reverse all of my issues. And my IBS went away, my skin cleared up. And I really was amazed that I had this once I stopped looking at food through a calorie lens and really looking at it through a medicine lens, that change again, and I think we're going to talk about today how change itself is a health tool if we harness it, was a huge identity shift for me because it wasn't just food becoming medicine. It was you have an active role in your health. You don't have to just be this passive patient. You can really know your body and actually you're going to do better when it comes to getting well. In this case, than my doctors at the time. This was almost 20 years ago. But then quickly, what I realized was feeling good wasn't enough. I was amazed at the results, but I was still emotionally eating at night and couldn't figure that out. I'm like, I know I feel so amazing. Why am I not sticking with it? And this basically led me to go back to get my master's degree in change, basically. It's called organizational dynamics, which is like an MBA in human behavior. But I wanted to understand why we can know that we feel better or why do we want these goals, whatever they may be. And yet we struggle to achieve what we want. And I basically realized that there's a huge emotional component to how we prioritize our wellness amongst all the other competing commitments, and to really go through that change process to learn to prioritize your health through thick and thin, quote, real life, or when you're, in a routine or when real life happens. If you can address the emotional piece to this, you will get exponential health results. And I did. And it made me a better entrepreneur. It created my intellectual property, Truth with Food. And it really made me start to understand that nutrition is a great invitation and doorway into these deeper emotional and soul lessons.
Wow, I relate so much to so much of what you've said. I mean, actually, recently my mom found my records from my pediatrician, who I went to until I was like 18, and it was it was so interesting. I felt the same way. I was like, "Oh my god, what is this?" And I was reading all these things, and I mean everything I knew about, but like when I was, I think 4, I had Lyme's disease, and I was on antibiotics for like a month or 3 weeks, and I was like, that's interesting. Like everything I know now about gut health and your microbiome has to do with how much antibiotics you took. And I always had like ear infections as a kid and was always taking antibiotics. It's just interesting to look at that now, knowing like what I know about health. And I'm obviously not as qualified or trained as you, but I do a lot of reading and research on this. So it's very interesting to look back and see kind of what that trajectory, and also I feel like I talk a lot about and hear a lot about like this kind of, what's the word, like resignation to your health of like, oh well, it's just that I get a stomach ache like once a day.
Yeah.
or like or like I had chronic migraines growing up, and I mean I still do, and for 8 months when I was in 8th grade to 9th grade, I had a migraine every day. Like I couldn't get rid of it. And I went on a preventative medication and it went down to 10 to 15 days a month. And I was like, that's amazing. For like 9 years, I thought it was amazing that I only had 15 headache days a month, until I went to another doctor that was like, that's not that great. And I was like, oh, yeah.
Like, I know. And I always tell my clients it's kind of tricky because if you look to the outside world to say what is normal or what's possible, there's just not that many great examples. And to your point about, and this happens to a lot of my clients if I'm working with them, especially privately, is we do an exhaustive health history and certain things that didn't seem monumental to them, right? Like going on antibiotics or going on birth control or these various things that just kind of, oh, that happened, that happened. But when you really take a root cause resolution approach to health and wellness, you start to realize, oh my God, all these things connect in a way that I didn't know of before. And it gives me so many more answers and solutions so that I can chart my own path for what's possible. Because I really do think we're in this unique time where we know the current healthcare system, I mean, to be fair, it wasn't designed for chronic illness, right? And I'm defining chronic illness as cutaneous lymphoma, as depression, as migraines, as binge eating, I would even say is a chronic illness. And it wasn't designed for that. And so we're trying to get it to fit in a box that it just really isn't meant to do. And so we also just don't know what's possible because the new story, the new paradigm, the new model is being created as we speak.
Yeah, for sure. And I think also it's limited in, I know we've talked about this and you talk about this a lot, but it's limited in the like what's treatable by a medication. Like I've realized I've had a lot of health things that I think are related just to being really stressed and holding a lot of tension in my body. Like I've had chronic migraines, I've had chronic pelvic pain, I've had like all types of issues. I've said before, and I'll say it again, like I don't want to say that my cancer was caused by stress, but I certainly don't think that it helped. Like I think that if that was dormant in me and it came out during a very stressful time in my life, that could have been related. So, but there's very few doctors that will say like, here's what we can do about stress. Like, let's talk about stress. They're like, here's a medication. Let's fix that one symptom. Let's prevent your migraines by taking a medication for 9 years. Like, it's silly.
Well, and I love
to
that
me.
you bring that up because that was in grad school. What I basically mapped out and like put in a research-based process was we tell people to stress less, right? But how do you do that? What are the emotional patterns that we've probably had since childhood? I mean, some people believe cancer comes out like 18 months after a stressful event. And, I was bullied really severely in fifth grade. And I also was exposed to pesticides and it runs in my family. And I work with a naturopath and she thinks my mercury fillings and the vaccines that I had from mercury were why I couldn't detox the pesticides. So to your point, everything's multifactorial, right? It may not be one thing that causes something. And so we need to understand the patterns and how things come together. And we need to understand our emotional patterns because a lot of people will tell you to stress less, but what's the opposite of that? Like, not even the opposite, but what's the healthy version of that? It's like live more in a way, or like live more deeply and live more resiliently and fulfilling. And unfortunately in our culture that often gets wrapped up in this like love and light bow. And that is like great in some ways. I say that's kind of like the gas. If you're in a car, that's like the gas. Like, here's where I want to go. Here's how I want to feel. Here's like, let's be positive. But we all have a break. And that break are these patterns that that were often born in our childhood that are still quote unquote stressing us out or echoing today. And if we can change those, then everything becomes simpler, which is super exciting. And I'll just put a period there.
I feel like there's so many different directions we can go and we will go. And I want to dive into all of this. And I think it's really interesting you mentioned the opposite of stress less and live more because I honestly feel, and I know that this is something we discussing, like I honestly feel like stressing less is stressful.
Yeah.
Like, how do I stress less? Like, am I relaxing enough? Am I meditating enough? Like, oh my God, I didn't meditate today. I'm now going to be stressed and I'm stressed and I'm going to be stressed. Like I feel like the more I get into wellness, first of all, the more you learn, the more overwhelming this all gets of like, oh my God, I can't eat anything and I can't be exposed to light and I can't and I have to hide in a cave and
Right.
how am I going to live my life? And also just that approach of like something I've been talking a lot about recently is like, I don't know how to have fun. Like, what is fun? Like, sometimes I feel like all of this stuff is so serious. And I talk about this on my Instagram sometimes. Like, if you read my Instagram captions, like, I seem like a really serious person. I am so not a really serious person. I mean, I guess if you're listening to the podcast, you know that because I joke about a lot of things. But like, this stuff, it can feel really heavy. And I feel like the more you focus on the meditation and the herbs and the nutrition and this, like, it distracts you from your life. And at the same time, I want to do those things because I know they support my health. But how? So I guess the question is, how do we undo that? And then getting into those emotional patterns, like maybe are those related, the emotional patterns and how we relate to these things, and how do we start to unravel that so that we can just live more, as you mentioned?
Yeah. I'm so glad that you brought that up. And I love you've been writing on Instagram how like lately, like it's almost, and I went through this phase myself. I think it's almost like a rite of passage where you're like, okay, I'm so focused on like the tools of wellness, but am I really being well? And this
Yeah.
is going to sound maybe like blasphemy to wellness junkies in particular, but if you need a tool like forever, it's probably not getting to the root of the issue. And wellness is actually about simplicity. If you look at nature, nature is so elegant and it's so like everything has a place, right? And nothing is wasted. And I think because wellness has become an industry similar to healthcare. You have a lot of capitalists who
Mm-hmm.
are looking at things from a business model rather than a outcomes based model. And that's a whole other conversation. But I think what I want people to realize is actually the healthier you get, the less tools you should be needing. So I'll give you an example of something very concrete. Probiotics, right? Everyone tells you to take probiotics or any supplement for that matter. And you could spend your entire life trying to research and keep up on that. But once you heal your gut, you actually don't need probiotics. You may need them for a specific point of time. And if I have to take antibiotics, I use a specific probiotic afterwards to, help support my body. And that's a healing tool. But long term, I should not need probiotics. That tool should become obsolete as my gut heals. Right. And so when it comes to a lot of the emotional stuff in particular, a lot of people who are in the wellness industry don't understand the change process. These are two different disciplines, right? So nutrition is a discipline, change is a discipline. And we talk about integrated medicine, but everyone has a different definition of that. I remember meeting one doctor who thought he was integrated because he shared a billing system with another doctor. And I was like, that is not integrated medicine, but okay, from a organizational structure standpoint, it is. But when we really think about integrative wellness, we want to look at things that where the emotional stuff simplifies the physical and the emotional and physical support each other, almost like a back and forth. And so a lot of times when we're adding meditation, right, and this kind of gets into cultural myths, but the tool becomes influenced through the culture that we're in. And in Western, and especially in America, we're a very rational based culture. And so we only know about meditation as like observing our thoughts. But when you look at the root of meditation, there's sound, there's chanting, there's movement, right, in other cultures. And so what we do often in the West is we reduce these tools away from their essence and away from the complexity and nuance that they offer. So what I've realized, and I think this will be helpful for listeners, is there is a whole emotional process that happens underneath us being quote unquote stressed. And I call it the auto eating spiral. However, if you whatever stubborn habit you have, my process is called truce with food, but it could be truce with drinking. It could be truce with overspending. It could be truce with learning about wellness, right?
Oh, I need that.
Yeah. And so what there is in this, if we're getting at the root of stubborn habits, and there's a different process to start habits versus stopping habits. And so if we really want to embody, I know I kind of went off on a tangent with meditation, but you can meditate in a way that you're observing your emotional patterns. I meant to swing back to that. There's a so we think of meditation in this isolated form versus we want to bring a meditative self-awareness piece to our everyday life, including our stress. So why am I getting stressed? So what I have realized in my research and then working with clients for 12 years is there is this, what I call auto eating spiral process coming back around. And so what we're saying when we're stressed or overwhelmed, what we're really saying most deeply is that we are without choice. And if you've often people say they feel out of control, but what they're saying is they're out of choice, right? We all know we don't have control over life, like all of it, right? But if you go to your doctor and they're like, you've got cramps, I don't know, or you have migraines, right? And one doctor says, okay, I'm just going to give you medicine and this is it. It can feel intuitively like, that's it, A or B. Like that's all you've got. And we then feel powerless and we feel stressed because it's like, this isn't working, right? In your case, it reduced your headaches to 50%, but that's still not liberation. That's still not health.
Mm.
And so it gets us into this, choice A or B. And that's when, at least with my clients, they overeat, or that's when people overdrink, or that's when people spend too much money. There's some sort of stress in their life, which means they're without choice. And so, but what actually happens when we feel powerless or overwhelmed is a 4-part process that's both thinking and feeling and how we make meaning in the world. And the first piece of this process, and this process can happen in a moment's time when you go to the doctor, or it can build all day. And this is why you do Netflix and binge and do Netflix, or just numb out on social media. It's all the same habits. But what happens is we feel an emotional response. And that emotion, people might say, I had a hard day at work. It's not work itself. It's what work triggered in you. It's not the doctor's appointment itself. It's what did that trigger in you? So if I take my example, I, having had cancer at 13, uncertainty was a huge trigger for me. So when I felt unfulfilled in my career, like every time I had a bad day at work, I was like, oh, it's always going to be like this. I don't know what I can do. I can't quit my job. I need health insurance, like corporate or nothing, right? But we all have an emotion that is very stressful to us because of our past. And then what happens after that emotion is a story about that emotion. So people think emotions are stressful. It's not the emotion itself, it's what we think it means. And so if we take my cancer example, when I was 13, uncertainty meant life or death, like literally. I didn't know. The odds were pretty good with my cancer. They always tell you you're lucky in relation to bad luck. They were like, if you're going to get a cancer, this is the type to get. And I'm like,
I hate when people say that.
I know.
It's like, you should get it and let me know what you think about it.
Yeah,
Thanks.
exactly. So what started to happen, though, because I never handled that stress pattern, was it started to be anything that was uncertain in my life. Like, why can't I meet somebody? Why is dating so hard? Why does my job suck? Like, why can't I figure out this food thing? Right? Like, uncertainty became not life or death, but success or failure. And over time, that became you suck. Not life is you need to, create this pattern. It's like you lose trust in yourself. I feel not enough. What am I doing wrong? Why is my body broken? Why do I have such a hard time? And you start to really feel like you're singled out by life rather than connected, as we all are to the human experience. So you have an emotion, then you have a story about your emotion. And then you have a stress response. And these are the 3 patterns that I've figured out. And we can go into those after I give an overview. So you have a stress response that protects you. In the same way we look at animals, they have fight, flight, or freeze, right? In the animal world, if a predator is coming on, we have an emotional response. That's the equivalent of fight, flight, or freeze. And it protects us in a way that helps us survive. And it helped us survive when we were younger. So one of the responses is accommodation. And when I was 13, I accommodated my doctor's orders and it saved my life. It was a really brilliant strategy, right? However, as I got older, trying to and having all these health problems as a result of chemo, and I was the first generation of childhood cancer survivors. So there was just this explanation and euphoria that we were living, right? There wasn't much of a territory or path carved for, well, what happens now, right? I had PTSD and my gut was destroyed. My hormones were destroyed, like everything from steroids, all that stuff. So I did, but again, all of this was unconscious and it was really valuable to accommodate my doctors. But then when I started to struggle with uncertainty in other areas, right, it was like, okay, I'm going to accommodate the diet industry. I'm going to follow Weight Watchers. I'm going to follow Whole30. I'm a good girl. I can accommodate, right? And then it was like, okay, I'm going to accommodate my bosses at work. I'm going to accommodate that I need health insurance. Like I started accommodating the cultural myths that told me this is what's going to make you happy. And basically when how I opened up, I started to realize at 23, I couldn't accommodate the doctor's recommendations anymore. I had to learn how to collaborate with my body. And as I started to unravel that accommodation pattern, and unraveled a lot of the ways that I accommodated. And it helped me change and heal and become much more of an authority in my own life of what is true for me on a mind, body, and soul level. So that we have a stress response that was very protective and brilliant at one point. And I call it, your inner protective response. And that inner protective response, then you have behaviors after that as a result of this stress response. And so, for example, when I was accommodating, going on a new diet, trying a new plan, trying a new doctor's recommendation, right? Trying to get a better job that was more prestigious, right? I kept trying to do the behaviors that had really worked for me 10 years prior. And so what happens in the wellness world, or especially, or anybody who usually approaches habit change, they're going to just look at that top thing of doing things, right? Of like, okay, if you're overeating, you just need to stop, or you need to ask yourself, is it really worth it? And until you get to the root of all these other things that are happening below, it actually is worth it in the moment. Or the reason you're not meditating is because you accommodated in some other area of your life and now you don't have time to meditate, right? And so when we start looking at things in a system and holistic perspective, once you get to the root of changing your story, you change your stress response, and these behaviors just disappear on their own. And so it simplifies so much. My clients are shocked at how, like, once they start changing their stress response around food or one area of their life, everything else just gets easier because they're the common denominator. And all this stuff that they thought was themselves being critical of themselves or having to add all these other tools that they were failing at, they're like, oh my God, these are protective behaviors. And if I just get to not thinking I need to be so protected all the time, I can do a lot less and live my life and actually feel fulfilled and better align my life in alignment with my values and goals.
Wow.
Sorry that I went on.
Pretty incredible. No, that was awesome. It's super interesting. So if we want to break the cycle, where do you start? Do you identify the trigger first? Do you figure out, like, unravel where those triggers started, or like what? Yeah, where do we start?
I love that
process. How do I fix me? We have about 35 minutes. So
well. Yeah, no, and
going.
This is like when you start to, I love this question because clarity starts to become a wellness tool. And I love when my clients come in, they're kind of like, I'm overwhelmed and stressed, and they can leave saying exactly what the stress is. They no longer use those terms. And it's like getting an accurate diagnosis, right? So I think the easiest place to start is identifying the 3 stress patterns. They're a little bit more, because what we're trying to do here is recognize the water we're swimming in, right? We know the metaphorical, like a fish swimming in water. How does a fish know it's in water? Because it's all around. And that's the same with our stories and our emotional patterns. So I think starting with the emotional patterns and stress responses is the easiest. And if people after hearing this think it's intriguing or resonant, I have a quiz on my website that will help you identify the main pattern in your life right now. But the 3 different patterns, and this is based on the Thomas Kilmann conflict model, which is an adult development theory. And the reason that this works so well in our life is we often are worried about doing the wrong thing or saying the wrong thing or that we're wrong in some way, right? You get a cancer diagnosis. My body's wrong. I've failed, right? Or you fall off your wellness wagon. What did I do wrong? Or work isn't going the way you want it. Or, you mess up on a date or something, right? And so we are always protecting ourselves against being wrong, and wrong as a being, not as like we made a wrong choice. So as a result, there's 3 different modes that we go into when we feel this psychological threat of conflict. And the first one, I'll start with the one that I mentioned before, is accommodate. And when we accommodate, we often think of it in relationship to, I'm going to accommodate the other person. So people, will say yes when they mean no, or they'll say, they will take on more than work. They'll try to fix people that can't be fixed or fix things for other people. And part of why we do this is we have this mental idea that things are either or. Either I say yes to this person or they're going to be disappointed in me. Either I take all this on at work or the team is going to fall apart. So there's a very black and white either or kind of model of things. And accommodating, a lot of behaviors of accommodating are trying to people please, trying to fix, trying to like over deliver, right? That's like a classic accommodators. I had one client, we were working on her, when our first session together, she was a private client, and she was saying, well, I do my nails for self-care, right? This was her current definition of self-care, which is what a lot of my clients are. And after we finished, she's like, oh my God. She said to me, she goes, I can only go on Thursdays because that's when my favorite lady is there. And I was like, so you're even accommodating your own like self-care schedule of this other woman? And she's like, oh my God, I thought I was doing something for myself, but it actually stresses me out to get there, and like, it doesn't work with my schedule. And I'm like, so you're even accommodating like when you're trying to do self-care. And that's why, again, when you get to the root of these things, everything changes. So that's the accommodator. And then the second pattern is the avoider. And the avoider tends to be, we call it, can we swear on this or should I? Yeah, we in Truths with Food and with my private clients, we call it like the chuck it, fuck it mode. This is when, and this is kind of the all or nothing mindset, right? There's this fantasy that one day I'm going to have all the time to meditate. I'm going to drink my herbs. I'm going to get all the sunlight I need, right? And then, or there's nothing, there's no time at all. And what happens, the behaviors in the avoid pattern are procrastination, right? So you can try to get all these wellness tips or productivity tips on procrastination, but if that's actually protecting you from something that you find really overwhelming or you have a lot of doubt around, you're not going to solve that with procrastination and productivity tips. Not speaking up for yourself, right? I have a lot of clients who feel dismissed by their doctors. And so it's just like, okay. And so they never get the information they need. When it comes to food and wellness, a lot of my clients, rather than focusing on the emotional stuff, they'll avoid it by trying a new plan, right? Like, oh, this didn't work for me. I'll try this. In the entrepreneurial world, this is when a lot of people pivot, right? Like, oh, I'm going to pivot. And oh my God, this is going to be the new direction, right? And so it's this very all or nothing, and trying to avoid discomfort and over time. So those are some of the behaviors of when we're avoiding. And then the last pattern is the competitor. And the competitor is always comparing themselves to either their old bodies, their old health, the old way things used to be for them, or other people. And they're kind of always thinking, am I winning or losing? Am I ahead or behind? And so they set really aggressive deadlines for healing, for projects, for their life. They compare themselves a lot to other people and their old selves. And as a result, they isolate themselves. They feel very different in a way. And so that's part of that compete pattern. And often it's that stress, right? All life is definitely going to handle stresses, but when we add the compete, avoid, and accommodate on top of it, it creates a sense of overwhelm. And I'm never going to finish. It results in things will never change. So why bother? And that's when the house of cards comes down. So those are the three patterns that block us from simplifying and changing so many other things. Yet I just really want to emphasize they were brilliantly protective in our earlier time in life. These aren't, and they've gotten us great things, right? My clients are very high achieving. A lot of them are leaders in the corporate world, entrepreneurs. That competitor has helped them a ton. It's gotten them a lot of great things. Accommodating has gotten them really great things. Avoiding has gotten, so there's a time and place for all this. This isn't black and white. It's just understanding when that is actually, these patterns are creating more stress now. And really what most people would call self-sabotaging behaviors, and I would call them self-protective behaviors.
So is the idea, well, first of all, I have two questions. I have many questions. Let's start with two.
Yeah.
First of all, I assume that you are often more than one of these at a time or at different times in your life, because I relate to all of them.
Yeah. And it's actually a really great question, because a lot of times people get into personality tests, or like, in my master's degree, I had to learn Enneagram, I had to learn Myers-Briggs, DISC, like every kind of personality profiling you can have. And those can be helpful, but you aren't actually one of these things. They are behaviors that you have. And that's important to realize, because if we think, oh, this is who I am, we think we can't change it. Versus, I think what most of my clients and myself discovered is we aren't really who we think we are when we are going to live well versus trying just to protect ourselves. We're way more powerful than we thought. So yes, we all flip between the different patterns, and usually in different areas of our life. And sometimes we even hyphenate. Like one of my clients was like, oh my God, I'm like the compete accommodator. Like if I'm winning, like I don't care. But if I'm losing, please like me. Please like
Definitely.
So yeah.
And then, so once we know these, is the idea that we're aware of them so we can start identifying these behaviors in the moment? Or is there a tool or some kind of, I don't know, process that you recommend that we can reflect on past experiences to be like, oh, that's why I did this, or this is how I can change that for the future?
Yeah, this is great. So, and if people take the quiz, there's a secret podcast episode, Insatiable podcast episode, where this goes into like even more tools. But I want to give you kind of the first like kind of tool you can get to go there. So, the ideal quadrant, I think even if people listening, they may hear conflict and go like, oh, I hate conflict, right? Or I hate being wrong, or I hate all this stuff. But conflict can actually be, or feeling wrong or not knowing what to do, overwhelmed, doubt can actually be really, really creative and constructive. And so the quadrant that we want to move to, which is total win-win, where we value the relationship to our body, to other people, to our callings, to our purpose, to our family, and we value our goals, is called collaboration. And I also like to think of this as like a creative space where you're like, okay, so I want to try to get to the win-win. And you start by saying like, what do I need here? Right? Because a lot of times the first step is first to label what your stress response is, and that will take some time. So just getting clarity on that can really help. Right? So say someone's in the avoider pattern, right, of exercising.
That's me. Let's do this.
Yeah, okay. So usually what we do is we turn out, and this process ultimately is about developing self-trust, because once we have self-trust in ourselves, we can be discerning. We know what tools we need, what we don't. And so that's the obstacle and the path. Because it gets a little heady. But so what we start to say is, okay, I'm avoiding exercise. So what do I actually need? If I think about movement, what do I need right now? Right? And when you start tuning into that, sometimes people will be like, okay, I just need to get started. I haven't done it in a while. And so I don't need to crush it. I need to get started. So then you want to say, okay, well, if you're an avoider, and all of these questions again are in the secret episode, but it's like, what will give me momentum to just, if my goal is to just get started and active again, what will give me momentum to do that? And it could be, okay, I'm not going to wait to go to a gym class. I'm just going to go outside and walk, right? Or I do a lot of, I'm an extrovert. I need to go to a class to get me back into it. A lot of my clients are introverts. So they do classes on their at home. They want some structure, but they don't want to go out. But starting to ask yourself, like, what do I really need versus what I think I should, have to, or must do is the key to this. Because if you tune into what you need, chances are you're going to get a different answer than what you think you should be doing. If you take the example of an accommodator, right? Someone asks them, hey, I'm trying to think of an accommodation example. Like, can you, I'll take an example from a client. Can you stay late, to get this project, to get this paper in? And so rather than just having a knee-jerk reaction of yes, because you want to be a team player, say, all right, well, when do you need this due, right? Like, well, first starting with like, what do I need here? I actually need to leave. I'm going to be stressed out if I have to stay later. And for me to do a good job, I would need 2 days to do this so I can think about it, edit. I'm obviously using my own process here, but people would think that. So then you go back and say, well, what is your due date with this? And what are your requirements for your expectations? And again, you get practice. The more you do this, the more practice you get. But what clients have found is often they were overinflating what was involved. So they went above and beyond without getting clear on expectations. And they thought they had to throw their own current goals, for that evening, say, under the bus. When I had one client, she was like, oh my God, I thought when they said, can you do this for me? It was due immediately. And they were like, by the end of the week. And so it was like, okay, there was the win-win. I didn't have to like stay late at night. I got clear on what they wanted me to do, which was way less than I thought. and I can totally fit it in by the end of the week. So a lot of this is that we aren't clear what we need and other people aren't clear what they need.
Yeah.
Or they're not clear with instructions. And so the more clarity you get about what you need and what's coming at you needs, right? Whether it's your body, whether it's a boss, whether it's a client, the more you can get to that collaboration space of like, okay, we're all getting what we need here.
This is me going back to what you were saying before about being logical and rational and New Yorker that needs to know all the information. But my first reaction when you were talking about the fitness thing, because this is a big problem that I have, which is I avoid working out. When you said, what do I need? My response was like, I don't know. I need to work out. So I guess the question is, and then it goes back into all these patterns of like, well, according to everybody else, I need to take all these herbs and meditate and journal and, dry brush and rub myself with oil, and then I can't do any work because I've spent the whole day self-caring. And I don't even know. But so that's a big question that I've had, which is, I'm not sure if it's the same question, but how do we figure out what we actually need and what actually serves us? Because I found we talk a lot in the wellness world about routines and finding your morning routine and finding the herbs that work for you and finding the process and finding the nutrition system that works for you and serves your body best. There's literally like 50,000 million combinations of those. So I don't know, if I eat paleo, but don't dry brush, and then try dry brushing, but then don't include my herbs, but then meditate, how do you unravel what you actually need, what those routines are? And like you said, really get in touch with yourself and not the outside world when you don't know. I mean, especially with social media and everybody telling you need everything and you need to take collagen every day for $5 billion because otherwise you will die. Yeah. Immediately, just drop dead.
Yes. Yeah, no, that is such a great question. And I'm glad you asked it because I can totally explain. So, I mean, it is a process. Truth with Food is a 6-month program, and it's a framework for people to learn their body and emotions, right? It takes minimum 6 months to figure that out. However, the big trick is that we often are doing these things. Well, I should work out because to be good, right? Our reference is to be good. But what we do in Truth with Food, and I do with private clients, is start to reframe rather than trying to be good, right? Because competing, avoiding, and accommodating is the good girl archetype. That's how we are good and we fit in. And what we're doing is we're evaluating what we should be doing based on what to your point, everyone else is telling us we should do. And so the only reward is someone else approves of us. That's really, it looks good. And what we have to start to do is turn in and say, well, what do I need? What do I actually care about? And this is actually a self-actualization process. So for example, with the exercise, well, okay, do I need to exercise? What real benefit do I get from exercise? So I used to look at exercise through a calorie lens. Oh my God, I'm going to burn 500 calories. But as I got healthier, I was like, actually, exercise doesn't really affect my weight that much. However, it's meaningful to me because it gives me more energy. It's like a quick fix, literally. If I work out at lunchtime or, at lunchtime's best for me, I have more energy to get through the afternoon. Do I need it just to clear my head today? Do I need it just so that I can get through the discomfort of starting? And as we start to develop why these things are meaningful to us, it creates a positive feedback loop. So the idea of accountability becomes obsolete because I don't have a trainer. I don't have I don't have any rigid workout routine. But I do it because of the immediate benefits that I get. It helps me sleep better. I get out right now. Being outside is important to me. So I've taken my workouts outdoors. And what's important about this is, to your point, everyone's saying you should have a morning routine or you should eat like this. The truth is our bodies are dynamic. Health is dynamic, right? We just getting into winter. I feel like doing weightlifting and yoga. Whereas before I was doing bar method. Right. For me, the goal is as long as I'm moving and feeling better after it in the afternoon. It's not about And that's what feels meaningful to me. And so as we start to figure out what's meaningful to us and why it really matters to us, we can honor the dynamic changing nature of ourselves, of the seasons that we're in, both environmentally and the seasons of our lives. And we get really clear on what's important to us. And as that starts to happen, you can it gets easier to tune out everybody else. And you start to realize that a lot of the stuff you thought was helping you actually isn't creating a positive feedback loop. So I think we've been taught not to trust ourselves because we tell ourselves there's an inner critic and it's telling us we're not good enough. But once you start to understand that stuff is protective, okay, maybe I'm not meditating because it's actually not the lever I want to pull right now. Right? Like, or maybe I'm trying to, my clients start to really understand how important emotional choices are. So maybe I just had a client on my podcast following up with her like several years after Truth with Food, and she was eating still relatively well, but she was in a really stressful job and had to prioritize that. So they ate takeout, during the week. It was healthy takeout. It wasn't home cooked, but you know what? The important thing for her at that point, the health metric was stretching herself and at least eating well, not being perfect. And so you start to become much more intuitive with like what you need to prioritize when or whatnot. But it starts with, why is this actually going to benefit me today? I think that's an easier question. Like I call it the quick fixes, right? Like if someone tells you to change up your coffee, that's one thing I recommend with clients is like, okay, have some food in your body before you eat coffee. Experiment with it. Everything I tell is an experiment. When they start to realize that they don't crash and they don't have anxiety because they didn't have coffee first thing in the morning, it's not really hard to get them to not change that. Right. Like it just happens. But what I love about this process is it helps us connect to see what actually works for us, what's actually creating a positive feedback loop. I have some clients who hate journaling. Others love them. Other people dance, and that's how they get out their intuition. Some people walk with their pet, right? The themes may be the same, but how we do it is going to be different.
Yeah. So I definitely resonate with that experimentation. And I mean, I've never really gotten into a fitness thing. Like I've never been into fitness. I do really love yoga, but also has been very like on again, off again. Like I'm a very black or white person. I'm like, I'm going to do a 30-day yoga challenge. And then I like won't go to yoga for 6 months after it. So it's just like, I'm not good at moderation.
Yeah. And that's part of the medicine. I mean, that's what Truth with Food is. It breaks people out of black and white, all or nothing thinking, because that's, again, a health tool when we're extreme and we're in a culture that supports that. But again, that I would say that's part of that avoid pattern, right? Like you're building part of when we avoid, we build things up. Like it has to be an hour and a half yoga class and versus, okay, like if I'm using yoga to just like clear my head, 15 minutes at home, like I've done enough classes that I can do it at home, right? And so then that builds. But yeah, that's part of the obstacle in the path of self-trust is not getting into all or nothing and seeing that small, steady tweaks work because we're told that doesn't work. And so you have to actually experience it for yourself, not magical thinking. I'm very much a realist. Like my whole community we call ourselves healthy skeptics, like highly discerning bunch. So I get it. But as we start to connect to what it really means for us versus the experts, it just gets easier to then figure it out the next time, if that's clear.
Yeah. One thing I've asked other people on this podcast before, but it's so relevant to this conversation, so I'd love to hear your take on it is, and you mentioned this a little bit, how do you discern between something you're avoiding and something you're intuitively not doing? So like, for example, meditation. Another thing that I'm like, I really should meditate. I feel better when I meditate. Like I go to a natural doctor. She's like, you need to meditate. Like, I know this is going to be good for you. You're stressed. You have anxiety, you like all these things, meditate. And I'm just avoiding it. So how do you know that it's when I wake up in the morning and I don't want to meditate, how do I know if I'm avoiding that or if I'm like, oh, my intuition is telling me not to meditate this morning? How do you discern between those two?
Wonderful question. So the way that I see it is we have this protective side of ourselves. Let's just call it the inner protector. I mean, I call it the inner protector, so let's call it that. And sometimes it generates really logical and noble thoughts. Not only like, you don't want to do this, but it's like, you don't have time to meditate. You got to get down to work, right? It's all these things that tell us things that really protects the identities that we love about ourselves, right? And so what is really important is to start to realize that what often feels like intuition is this protective side of ourselves. Intuition is actually much more vague than people think. Often people confuse that protective side with their intuition, saying like, my intuition tells me I shouldn't do it today. And so I think maybe the way to start is to soften into the resistance rather than saying, don't listen. Traditionally people would say, don't listen to that inner critic, don't whatever. I would say, let's soften into it. Like, why would it make sense to skip meditation? And it might be like, well, because I don't have time, or I have to get, if it's the intuitive side, it's kind of like, when but I really think intuition, because it's based on patterns, takes a long time to develop. I think we all have it, and sometimes it's louder than not, but these smaller choices takes much more of a fine tunement. Versus if it's the protective side of us, it's going to not be very generative, right? It's going to be like, you just can't. It's going to close down any possibility so that it can be all or nothing or black and white. But if you soften into it and it's like, well, I don't want to do it for 10 minutes. So what if being generative, what if you try for 2? Oh, that's not going to help. Well, it's like, well, will it hurt? Right. So the more that you can be generative, then you can kind of get yourself to a place where you at least start if you're in that avoid pattern, right? This is why knowing that what pattern you're in. And then you can see and we experiment, because part of dissolving and I would say integrating this protective voice of ours inside of ourselves is giving it real data that it's safe to do the thing that it thought it couldn't do, that it was trying to protect you against. So for meditation, you may not be getting a lot out of it, or maybe you feel like you have to get right down to work in the morning. What goes through your mind when you wake up?
It's a good question, because it's just like, I don't feel like it. I don't know. Like, there's not a real, even to say I don't have time, I know is ridiculous. Like, who doesn't have 5 or 10 minutes to do something? I think it's, for me, I'm once again, like, if you told me I need to do a 30-day meditation challenge, I would probably do it. Like, I'm just very I don't know what the answer is. I don't know. The answer is I really don't know. It's just I don't want to do this. I don't want to work out. I've also been in kind of just a phase right now where I'm just blah about a lot of things. I don't feel like doing that. I don't I don't know why. So it probably is some kind of avoiding pattern. Or
yeah. Also, what I'm hearing, and I think part of why challenges are so enticing, is we do need some sort of structure, right?
Yeah.
We do best when we have systems and structures in place, and that frees up energy. And sometimes, though, what we do when we're in that avoid pattern is we go to an extreme structure, right? And so then I would recommend, what if you found a gradual program that gave you the structure, but we're going to start with 1 minute a day. And then you can evaluate, then you can start to experiment. And I think it's a tool of telling people, just try it. Because often we think, oh, now I'm going to have to do it for 30 days, or I'm going to have to do it forever. It's like, why don't you just try it for a minute? Find a program that's 30 days that builds, right? And let's just try it for a minute. All right. Did that do anything? It wasn't bad. All right, I'll try 2 minutes. I'll keep going, and start to see then into bringing it back to, do I notice any benefits in the morning, later in the day, right? But connecting it to real instant benefits. And that's something you have to build out of a pattern, because right now maybe you've liked it, but you haven't connected it to any real benefit. And so maybe that's also intuitively why you're not into it right now. Maybe you want to walk outside, because you can do meditation in any form, right? It's not
That's true.
Just so it's I love in the morning, I don't meditate, but I walk my dog and I take him to the park, and it's just me and him. And I go into a park and it does the meditation for me, because I can't quiet my mind often. So I feel very in the moment. And so that to me is meditation. And I do that because I love it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny. As we're speaking, I'm thinking more and more about all of this. And I think one of the biggest challenges I have right now is and this is probably related to the meditation and the fitness and everything, is just, I feel like I've been on this health journey for almost 2 years now, since I was diagnosed with cancer. And I just, and longer, I've always been interested in health and wellness. Talk about Weight Watchers. I once tried to sign up for Weight Watchers, and they told me didn't weigh enough. I was but I didn't want to lose weight. I just wanted a system to track what I was eating. I wasn't trying to lose weight, but they were no, they blocked me. Anyway, I feel like lately nothing is helping me. And that might be extreme. I'm sure if I like compared it to if I didn't do any of this stuff, I would feel differently. But I like take these herbs and people are like, I feel more relaxed. I do this. I do. I'm like, I don't feel anything. Like, hello, anybody there? And like meditation, I do notice some differences. And like, there are some things, but I feel like lately, I don't know if I'm just skeptical about everything or like you said, like the capitalism thing. I'm like, are people just trying to sell these things? I'm like, what? Like, why am I buying this? And everyone says they feel more energy when they take this one thing and I feel nothing. So I wonder if that has to do with it, just like overall skepticism of like, is this any of this really helping me? And like, am I just adding more stuff to my plate that's like useless and a waste of time or money or whatever? That sounds kind of sad. But I think that goes back to our conversation around like just the overwhelm in this community and like my question before about like how do we actually figure out what works for us. And my natural doctor was like, you it seems like you have some kind of block around this stuff working, like psychological block, because like some of these things should be helping me and they don't seem to be. So I don't know, that was a ramble.
I would no, I love that because it brings up a lot. I actually think where you are when it feels like nothing seems to be working. One of my favorite quotes by Wendell Berry, who is a farmer and philosopher, says, when we no longer know what to do, that's when the real work begins because the mind isn't employed. And I love that because that's what set me on my journey. I was like, something has to change. I don't know what the fuck it is, but I can't keep doing what I'm doing. And I think because a lot of wellness stuff is so surface level, I think that you're at that it doesn't really, a lot of it doesn't help. I mean, candidly, it doesn't. I mean, I always tell clients, if things aren't simplifying your life, right? At the end of the day, the most we can do to control our health is to sleep well, move, have great relationships, enjoy the things in our life, eat well, get natural sunlight. And I think I said move your body, right? And like, it's actually not that complicated, right? We know the answers, but how do we get to those big pillars? Because it is complicated in our modern life where we're expected to work all the time, where our food, I mean, my God, like you need a nutrition degree just to know what to look for. And then food companies know what consumers are looking for, so they rename it, right? All this stuff is complicated and gets more and more complicated. And so to me, I think that you're at a really interesting transition point of like, I'm going to figure out what works for me. I mean, maybe there are blocks, but I often think that, I use an adult development model in Truths with Food to take people from that good girl orientation to self-trust and more internally focused. And people only change when there's a real pain point, right? All of us. And so I think that what you're struggling with right now, I mean, it feels like a struggle of nothing's working and kind of blah on everything is like a really healthy sign that you're ready to like get to more in the health arena, what in the adult development model, it's self-transforming, where it's like, okay, I've tried what everyone has told me. It's been fun and all that stuff, but it's not fun anymore. And so let me follow that. And it's going to require listening to myself, maybe doing something that unconventional that I haven't done before. But given your own interest in simplicity and environmentalism and all this stuff, I think it's totally on track with like, I don't know what's true to you anyways. So
That's true.
I know it's not a fun place to be because it's like, okay, give me the framework or give me, I just want the answer. However, I think you're at a really healthy spot.
I'm glad to hear that. It doesn't always feel that way.
Oh no, no. When you're in the midst of it, right? But that's part of Octavia Butler, who is I've been introduced to her work from the women at How to Survive the End of the World podcast, and they brought up this quote that she said that God is change, and she has a whole paragraph on it. But I love that concept because I believe God is nature, and I think nature lives within all of us, and we are part of nature. And so when we're at that place where you're at, we're actually getting in touch with our own divinity, our own self-trust of like, all right, you got to not listen to the noise and like get back to basics. And you yourself and your choices are powerful enough. And obviously getting the right support, whatever that looks like to help with that. But I find a lot of people, as they get healthier and healthier, or they hit a wall, they start looking for tools that are more about discernment and customization and individualization versus formulas and someone else telling them what to do.
Yeah,
Whether it's health, business advice, all that, relationship advice, all that stuff.
it's so interesting you say that, because I feel like often I'll be like really stressed in a health decision or a business decision or all those things you just said. And I'll like turn to, like, we're in entrepreneur Facebook group. So I'll like frantically post a question. And then like within a day, I'm like, why did I even ask that? And like the responses don't resonate with me. And I'm like, you don't understand at all what I'm trying to say. And I'm like, I don't need your advice. Like, why did I ask you? And I think it's interesting you bring that up, because I feel like that's definitely what I'm learning, which is like, sometimes it feels like in a panicky moment, like you need to turn to all these things. But the things that I'm drawn to for this year, for 2019, for setting resolutions, are like really the internal work and the self-reflection and all of that, because I feel like half the time when I do ask those questions to other people, not that they're not really smart and helpful and trying to be helpful, but half the time I'm like, well, I know the answer, so why? It's more like looking for validation than like actually. And then when they don't validate you, you're like, you're an idiot. Like, what are you talking about? And when they do, you're like, great, I'm on track. So
Yeah.
it's interesting that you said that, because it's a good reframing for me to just say, like, let's tune all of that out and just focus on the things that are speaking to me.
And there is a perfect example of your intuition being spot on. Like 2019 is about the internal work. And so I would say that part of your protective behavior is then to is to react right away and go get validation. One of the tools we talk about, and that's part of your avoiding of having to like sit with, is this right or wrong? And so I would say experiment with your wellness tool would be experiment with just sitting with your question for a day and not reacting and see what happens. And that's an example of simplicity. Then it saves you going onto Facebook. It saves the like emotional having to respond to everyone, right? It's like that can be a new thing. And the more that I see, I don't need to react right away, the less I avoid going in, right? It's like that discomfort will dissolve if you stay with it. But we just, because again, and I would probably say that avoiding was really protective for you at some point in your past. And so that it's like, so it's still, but now it's no longer, its usefulness is becoming obsolete in certain categories. But
Right.
that's a perfect example of intuitively in the big picture, you know where you're going. And now you just need help where that protective side of you is kind of trying to sidetrack that and take a lot of your energy and, you know, what's in your mental and emotional field. Because you also, there's emotional residue of other people's advice. And I want to be clear, it doesn't mean all or nothing, you never get anyone's advice again. However, coaching is a real skill set. I think a lot of people think they can just like coach, but you'll start to find the friends in your life that have a more coaching disposition that aren't going to give you advice. And they're going to, and that's, as we get more savvy with these patterns, we can say, here's what I need. I just need someone to listen to me. Please don't give me advice. Like I had to like work out that dynamic with my husband because he would try to fix things. And then I'd get so frustrated because I was like, I don't need a solution. I need you to listen to me. But then once I expressed that to him, things got a lot better, but I had to first verbalize that. So that's an example of, as you start to understand these patterns and your protective behaviors, you experiment with other things, and then life just becomes simpler and deeper and richer and like so much more on target and aligned with what you are. And that's why it's important though to recognize what's protective versus saying it's a critical side of yourself that like, oh, I don't think I'm enough or whatever. No, it's a very protective side. And so we want to explore, why am I doing this? Rather than I just shouldn't be doing it. Because then you don't get the next steps of, okay, I'm not going to react for a day. Right. And then if I'm still stumped, I'll go to someone who's going to help me draw out the questions that I need to ask myself rather than give me the answers.
So is it important to identify those patterns from your past, like to identify like where these patterns started from, or does it not really matter once you start to just recognize them in the moment? Like the avoider or all that.
Yeah. Yeah. I take people through some exercises that help them and it just connects a lot of dots. I always say coaching is therapeutic, but not therapy. And so my concern is, my point of having people kind of understand where they came from was to have to open up compassion for themselves. Like, I'm not just doing this to do it because I feel like in the wellness world, it's like, you are enough, you are enough. Like, I just, like, I cannot stand that concept. We all know we're enough. It's just we've been conditioned to believe that certain parts about it. So this is actually an unlearning to me that really has to take place. Um, and so I think understanding when in your past it was really helpful to accommodate or compete or avoid, and how those patterns are echoing today. That's what I say. They're echoing today. And so my goal is not to stay in the past, but how can we change them today? Because what's really interesting is over the long run, as you change them today, the past has different meanings. So, for example, with my cancer experience, you know, for a long time, and this was unconscious, I felt like a victim. Like, I felt targeted. Childhood cancer was very rare. Unfortunately, it's grown since then, but I was like, you know, no one had cancer 27
Right.
years ago, or wasn't as prevalent, right? That's how long and I had to stop. My healing process was to no longer feel like a victim in with my body and my health. And so now that I've created Truths with Food, and I love the clients I work with, and they get so much great results, my cancer has a different meaning now. It's like, okay, I went through that and I did the work to heal it, and now I'm able to help other people. So it feels different than, I mean, I still would never choose it.
Right.
I can hold both, right? Like, I still would never go through that, and I'm really proud of what I've done with a really shitty experience. Um, and so our past starts to have different meaning if we can really heal ourselves. Because what I've found is most people, when you've had little T's or big T's in your past, little traumas or big traumas, and little T's can be bullying, it can be having your parents go through a divorce, right? A lot of these emotional things are they wear away your self-trust and that sense of good enough over time, and they're just as they create how we handle stress today just as much as something like your house burning down, right? We don't, or like going through something that we think of as traditional very trauma, like, you know, going off to war, being a refugee. um but we can change how those patterns and the meaning of our past, and that's, to me, is where so much healing happens and your body accelerates. You know, on a physiological level, you're no longer in low grade fight or flight all the time. Your nervous system resets, so you're more time in healing. So whatever you are doing is counting more than if you're in a state of stress because you feel like you need to meditate and take herbs and all that kind of stuff. Um, so I think it's just helpful in the sense of that it opens up some compassion for ourselves. And I will say too, my clients, again, this is my community. I'm not quite sure about yours, but my clients tend to think when they hear compassion, they're like, yeah. Like, that's it's kind of weak. It tends to be what they think. But they start to realize how hardcore compassion, self-compassion really is. Because you have to hold, like, this is really sad that this happened. This is really sad. And I'm going to get better at accommodating, right? Like, I'm going to devote myself to myself, and be on my own team. And even when I mess up, and even when I'm imperfect, and especially when I'm imperfect, because that's where I learn. So it's a real healing process. But yeah, having self-compassion is important for the past. I would say, for if you're not going through a formal exercise or support of someone who can do this, just have it open up compassion for you.
Yeah. So is that what you recommend in terms of um un what's the word? Oh, losing my train of thought.
Unlearning.
Unlearning. No, well, actually, like, discovering what these blocks are and where they came from. Do you recommend, like, working with a therapist or a practitioner? Are there tools we can do on our own to figure that out?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I'm certifying people in Truths with Food, but no one else is doing what I'm doing. Like, it truly is different. It's just my obstacle and path. Because you want to have the support of someone to help you weed through this stuff. It's not as much as like one tool, it's layers of discernment, it's
Right.
layers of digging through the soil. And so, and I think a lot of therapists, from my experience, they help you with the past. Um, yeah, I mean, I don't know anyone doing things this way particular, but I think yeah, I just don't, I take a developmental approach to coaching, which is a root cause resolution to change. So most coaching and I would say even therapy, because coaching theory comes out of therapy theory.
Mhm.
And it comes from more of an and I can't speak to therapy, but I can speak to coaching. It's more of an accountability model. And it's more of like, oh, I'm going to help you meditate, right? Like you're blocked around meditation. So I'm going to help you meditate. Like, let's layer habits and let's figure out why you're motivated to do this. And I'm saying there's a bigger web here. And we need to look at the web. And I don't know many other people doing that. I also don't pay attention to the wellness world a lot. So I'm putting that asterisk there.
That's good.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there are some people I totally learn from, but it's not a lot of people understand things at the root cause, like the root cause. So, and I'm always learning too. I mean, I've just been learning about how important natural light is and in terms of mitochondria function and how food is 30% of our energy needs versus light. And so I'm also always learning as well. So I don't want it to seem like I have it all figured out, but I have a really effective change process. So I think, and you don't necessarily need to, obviously go through Truths with Food or work with me privately. I think it's just, again, identifying these patterns, and you can take the quiz to start to identify them. And then there's even more tools and questions to help people discern what they need in that secret episode, but then labeling the patterns and then starting to really use your past as compassion for yourself, and then start to experiment with new behaviors and see if it really benefits you is the process in a nutshell. But it is very I joke it's a complex process to simplicity.
It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So did that answer it, or did I just kind of?
No, yeah, that definitely answered it. You mentioned food is 30% of our energy. What percent is light?
60%.
Wow.
Yeah.
I always said I feel like more like a plant than a human. I'm like, I need so much light to be like a happy, functional person. I don't understand when people are like, come to my office. And I'm like, your office has no windows. How do you live? I will die.
So that is a perfect
shrivel up.
example of intuition, right? A lot of my clients realize they're on the right track, like what's naturally intuitive to them. And so light, yeah, I just did Insatiable season 6, episode 6, I believe it is, with my friend Brandon, who is like amazing trainer, nutritionist, like all this stuff. And we talked about the importance of light, and like so many of the issues, even with functional medicine, doesn't get to the root of, because ultimately, if you have mitochondria dysfunction, natural sunlight and minimizing your blue light will do more to like accelerate your healing, because natural light in the morning creates melatonin, which helps you sleep better, but then it keeps your mitochondria in better burning. Like I'm going off on a tangent now, but it just I think the takeaway is that like the closer you get back into nature and that simplicity and that elegance, the health, that's the path. It's not, even shakes and powders. And again, I used those for a while. I had to use some powders to heal my gut, a while ago. So I don't want to say nothing is never used. However, your trajectory should be getting you back and back closer to nature. As you get healthier, you will crave it naturally. And your example of needing light, that's going to be really important for you. You already felt it naturally. So just keep going with that. And like, I don't know if that helps. Yeah.
No, it definitely helps. This is probably a really stupid question, but
no stupid
does
question.
Natural, once in a presentation, I said like, there are no stupid questions, just stupid people. And it's a quote I always say. And it was like with college students, and the person took it as if I was telling her she was stupid and was like really offended. And I was like, oh my God, this was just a joke. So anyway,
her protective side was out. That's what you start to realize. My clients are like, I feel like I have X-ray vision with how other people are behaving now. And they're like, you're right. Everyone is just like this wounded 6-year-old dressed up in like a dress. And I'm like, yep, pretty much.
Yeah. She even like mentioned it in her like end of this, it was like a summer internship, like her end of the summer like speech about how this one speaker said it to her, and I was like, oh my God, I traumatized this person. But anyway, I digress. My potentially stupid question is natural light. Like if my apartment has really good direct light, do I have to be outside to get the benefits of it, or can I just be getting like light through a window?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I think I would say the answer is both, especially morning light is. So because nature is exponential, and even though we approach health very in a linear fashion, if you get that morning light and you're outside, because you absorb light through your eye and your skin. So you need to absorb it through both areas, and especially the eye sets up your melatonin production.
Mm.
So the more that you can be out there, the better. And so I would say, like, during the morning, get that, but then be exposed to light, during the day in your windows.
Got it. Got it. It's actually interesting because I wonder from an intuitive perspective, part of my cancer treatment, because it's a skin disease, is light therapy. So I wonder if like my attraction to light has to do with, although it's probably been longer than I've had this, but anyway,
Well, you
I
start to
digress.
realize, like, I mean, in this episode, Brandon talks about how even you can spot sun. So, like, if you have a risk of breast cancer, like if you've had breast cancer, like it's really important to get sun on your breast. And I was like, that's so
Hmm.
interesting. Like, medicine basically takes what nature does. That's radiation, right? Like, we radiate the breast for
Mm,
cancer, or like I had radiation in my chest. And it's like the sun's doing that naturally in a less extreme form. So if we can just do what nature's doing, like if we can just get back in touch with nature, we then don't need to overcompensate for what nature's already doing. And it's also more toxic when it's extreme, right? Like, and I'm talking about radiation, not light
right.
therapy. I'm not familiar with it, but like chemotherapy and all
Yeah.
that stuff I was on, it's like putting nature on steroids. And so, yeah, like Western medicine is even pharma, right? They take like the replica or like the the potent part of plants and they just like jack it up 5,000% and they take it out of its root and like
Hmm.
do what our culture does is, reduce things to parts, but it's all based on nature.
Yeah, it's definitely a totally different conversation we could have. But
Yeah.
I just find it so funny that that's called alternative medicine. I'm like, I'm pretty sure pharmaceuticals are the alternative. Like this is the original. Like the OG medicine was like people would pick some turmeric when they, had inflammation and that would help them. And now it's like, oh my God, you're crazy. You're gonna have like something from the earth and I could have like this thing that a person made in a lab. Like
Yeah.
that's way more normal. Like what? Like when did that happen? And I'm not dissing medication. I take it sometimes if I need, but for the most part, I just find it so funny that people think I'm like insane that I
I
take
tell
this herb that comes from the earth. Oh my God. Like,
I tell clients all the time that, like, by the time they're done working with me, they're like, I feel like I'm in the upside down. They're like, Truce with Food, is abbreviated TWF, and it should be WTF. Because my clients are not woo. They're not like they're very much in the real world. A lot of them are even physicians or doctors or counselors and or executives. And coming out of it, they start to see the matrix a lot more. And we're all still operating in the real world. But I think that's where you can change the most. But yeah, they're like, oh my God, I feel like everything is opposite day now. Like,
definitely. So the root cause diagnosis or change theory that you work with, the root cause would then be in the example we've been using for you, that was accommodating your doctors in cancer. Is that what you're referring to when you say root cause? Is like where did this behavior begin?
yeah. So the root cause is actually the story I had around uncertainty. So
Okay.
uncertainty, I had connected it to life or death. And then because I didn't change that pattern, it became, and I was no longer, quote unquote, after 5 years, things were not life or death, but they became metaphorically life or death in terms of success or failure. And so the
Mm.
root cause was I made uncertainty mean that I needed to defend myself and it was unsafe. And the healing path was to make uncertainty safe. And that's why I always say entrepreneurship healed me as much as chemo did to cure me, because to be a successful entrepreneur, you have to face uncertainty like 1,000 times a day. And the more that I get savvy with it by getting out of my own compete, avoid, accommodating patterns and collaborate with what's true for me, what my calling is with this work. And I think we have multiple callings. So I don't want to say it's like people think they have one, like that's very black and white. But the more that I get true to my path, including how my work fits into my personal life, right? That's the huge thing in the past couple of years is like, okay, my business is solid and flourishing. I need to have an identity outside of work. Like that's just healthy, right? And so that's been but it's a new uncertainty. But every time I am uncertain now, I get more and more savvy with it because I have context, I know what questions, and I'm more resilient, and uncertainty feels safe and actually rewarding to me now. Because I love the life I've created for myself. But it took exploring my binge eating to figure it out and make a lot of change. But that ultimately the path is, you know, a lot of people will say they're anxious, and underneath anxious is uncertainty. Some of my clients, inadequacy they have a story about inadequacy, if they're not enough, right? A lot of people, their stories around loneliness and being rejected. And seeing your story, again, it takes a process. And there's a lot of people who are trained in narrative coaching. I don't know if they take this approach to it, the way that I do it. So narrative coaching to me, though, is a really powerful form of coaching if people are interested in that. But that's the root cause of, I have an emotion that feels very unsafe and triggering. And so I do all these destructive behaviors that are actually protective. And I need to no longer, the story around uncertainty has finally changed for me. So I can give you an example of, I just, before Christmas break, or I have to get followed for secondary cancers. And my primary care doctor had found a lump in my breast. And I hadn't had my follow-up for 4 years because I had moved from Philadelphia, and I knew I avoided getting my medical records transferred. And I felt really calm. I used to binge eat before these tests and afterwards until I got the results. And he found the slump. I mean, I felt the feeling, and I mean, I cried. It added stress, but I did not eat. I did not binge. In fact, and again, this has taken years, but I took impeccable care of myself. I still worked out. I still slept. I had the savvy enough. My insurance company wanted me to get a mammogram, and I was like, no, I want an MRI. This is what I need. Mammographies have a lot of radiation. This is like, and MRIs, they don't pick up everything, but they pick up more than mammography. And so I knew how to advocate for myself. I knew how to get all the files I needed, because I was also having a thyroid ultrasound, and the doctor didn't have my previous results. And so they wanted to biopsy something. And I was like, you need my previous results to see if that nodule has been there. Like, from practicing and experimenting all these years, I was in the driver's seat. I got what I needed. I knew how to get what I needed. I didn't eat, and it all came back clear. And which is, I'm again so grateful for. But it was also 2 months of my life from the time of lump to results, that I was still taking great care of myself and able to still function in a way that, 10 years ago, I would have just been like, I can't do any of this. I'm not ever, like, I can't even function, So, I don't know if that's helpful, but that was the healing. And
Definitely.
you get so much of a reward, right? Things should always reward us if they're going to be sustainable, and create a positive feedback loop.
For sure. What kind of cancer did you have when you were a child?
Hodgkin's. So in your family of cutaneous, in the lymphoma family.
Ooh, lymphoma.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone's ever said that. I take it back.
Who said it's like, I don't want to be a part of any group that'll have me. That's how you feel as a cancer peep.
Yeah, seriously. Wow, this is so much information, great information and useful information. And I love this reframing, because I feel like a lot, I mean, we've talked about this a lot already, but I feel like a lot of the conversations that happen, I mean, I'm so entrenched in the stupid world of Instagram and wellness and all of that. And I just feel like the same conversations happen over and over again. And it feels like they work for you or there's something wrong with you. So I love this just totally different approach. I know it's going to be really helpful for everyone listening. So I would just love, because we talked about so many things, I would just love, as wrapping up, to just kind of summarize on like a few quick steps that people can take in order to start doing this work, because it's not as easy as just taking some herbs.
No.
And although herbs are annoying, sometimes, but sometimes they're helpful. But so
right.
There's the quiz that you offer. And then what else? Is it just starting to think about in the moment? And here's another question as I'm asking this. Is every time that we're avoiding something or worried about something, or from big to small, or putting something off, are these all part of this process? Is it just, should we just be tracking like, didn't want to work out today, didn't feel like doing this, avoided this, felt really competitive with this person? Like, is that part of this process of just like taking inventory of all of these moments?
Yeah, great question. So I would just start as a summary first for people to realize that tools should become obsolete. I really want people to understand that. Like, if you're really getting to the root and getting stronger and more like living more, the tool that you use should eventually, you shouldn't need.
Can you give examples of what those tools are?
Yeah. So like supplements, you should not need them forever, right? Powders, collagen, adaptogens, all that kind of stuff.
So more like food related, not like meditation or do you consider that a tool
Yeah,
in this regard?
well, I would say in that case, that's a great question. The basics of well, meditation can be different things, right? To me, meditation is self-awareness at its heart of what you're really doing. So, self-awareness, movement, food, fresh air, sleep, those are the foundations. And then
Got it.
everything else is pretty much tools,
Yeah.
and healthy relationships and spirituality. But everything else is pretty much like tools to help us restore balance or harmony in all of those. So then realize that stress and overwhelm are really ways that you're unclear of what emotional patterns are happening. So if you say I'm so stressed or I'm so overwhelmed, and I think one of the steps that is I can add that is really helpful is next time, yeah, I have my clients start with anytime they get mental food gymnastics or even spinning with, like, when you said you were like asking choice, posting questions to the entrepreneurial group that we're a part of, is anytime you start thinking should, have to, or must, like that's a clue that you're about to go into a stress pattern. So should, have to, must, like, or what do I do? Right? Doubt, uncertainty. Anytime you feel that kind of franticness, and it's different for everyone. Some people feel it, of my clients, it feels like a tornado of thoughts. Some of them, it just feels like I just want to shut down, right? Everyone has different sensations. But that's a clue that you're about to go into one of those patterns. And so and you're going to catch it in the beginning after the fact. So the way that you were like, oh, I was avoiding, like just sitting with myself and like, is this the right answer? And so then you can start to say, oh my God, I said yes when I didn't want to say no. Or like, I didn't even really think about what I wanted. I thought I was flexible. This is one thing I'm learning in my personal life is I think I don't have a lot of preferences. And I'm like, actually I do. I just don't want to advocate for myself. um,
Mm.
and so you're going to catch yourself after the fact, but being able to label, wow, I just compared myself. And we often compare ourselves to other women. This is one thing I learned in my entrepreneurial journey. Speaking of Instagram, I was always comparing myself to other entrepreneurs and they were all female. And I was like, oh my God. And it was the pattern from being bullied. But it was like, okay, so I'm comparing myself. And what is my behavior there? Then it's like, I find all the proof of how I'm behind, right? Or I find all the proof of like how I'm different, in both good and bad ways. And so starting to notice, oh, this is what I do when I'm in this defensive position. And then, so again, labeling those is really important and starting to recognize what the actual behaviors are. And then it's turning back into, what do I need here? Right? Like when I was comparing myself to other entrepreneurs, especially their social media following, I was like, I actually don't even get most of my clients from social media. Like a lot of my clients aren't even on social media. So why am I using this as a metric? Now it's something as I've grown that I have to learn how to do, but I was creating this like stress and anxiety and feeling behind when I was like, I get a lot of referrals. I have integrated doctors and psychiatrists referring people to me. Like that's actually where a lot of my clients come from. So as you start to come back to your center, what do I need to do? Right. And maybe often it is sharing just how you're feeling with someone, not for them. That is works wonders when we just acknowledge how we're feeling and like let it out or chat with someone like that. It shifts the energy. And then getting clear on what we need and then experimenting with that to see if it really makes our life better.
Wow. I love that.
Is that
It's
helpful as a
so
summary?
helpful.
Is it
Yeah, so
okay?
helpful. It's funny, actually, I don't know what you would think of this, but on my to-do list for like self exploration type things, because I often, especially on social media, get so into these like comparison of like, why is she speaking at this event and I'm not? And like all of these things. So I haven't done it yet, but I made a note to make a list of the things that people might think about that of me, of like the things that I'm doing. I don't know if that's like a healthy thing or not, but just like we look at these things and you always just see the things that you don't have. And you're not like, whoa, I did all these cool things this year. Or like I helped X, Y, and Z person, or I wrote for this publication. You're just like, I don't have that. So it's an interesting, I don't know.
Well, and that's part of the challenge of our culture is scarcity,
Yeah.
right? We are set up in a capitalistic system. And so resources are very scarce, right? People will say, oh, think abundance. And in some cases that's true, but ultimately on a deep level and as women, this is the first time we've had access to our own resources, right? So other women have wounded us, because I bet you're not comparing yourself to the dude Instagrammers, right?
I don't think I follow any men on
Yeah,
Instagram.
I don't think
Maybe
I
like
knew either.
5.
Maybe like
My
a
friends.
couple, but they're like my
Yeah,
friends. Yeah.
exactly.
But we've learned to compete with women because we had to, right? Like this was a survival mechanism. And then we've also been, as a result, we've often been wounded by them. And so when we start to realize, like, that's why I'm doing this. And I think when we can start to realize, like, there's no scarcity of what we really want in life in terms of connection and belonging and making a difference in the world and making our mark. Like, only you can make your mark. Only I can make my mark. We have to learn a lot and skills to do that. But yeah, so starting to recognize, but I did all of this. And also, again, I think it comes back to that discernment of like, what metrics are really important to me? Did I need to go to that conference, right? Like, I was like, do I need all of these like Facebook followers? Like, I don't even really like Facebook. Like, so you start to like, when you get caught in that like comparison, when you come back to like what's actually fun for you, and like it inspired me, like realizing I didn't really love social media inspired me to start my podcast, Insatiable. And it's been the best thing that I love doing. I like to market through education. I'm like, okay, here's my very nuanced, complex ideas. Either this is for you or not, but I don't have to like, I'm not great at like selling, because you also have to be ready to do the work that I do with clients. But I started that Insatiable podcast just with the effort of like, this will help me get out. I was leaving New York and Philly and moving back to Pittsburgh, where I'm from. And I was like, I just want to talk to people about stuff and like interview them because I love doing that. And it's been Insatiable is a huge runaway success. It's been great for my business. And it's like, okay, now maybe I need to focus on social media for my next stage of growth. But it's coming from a place of like, this is actually going to be meaningful versus I'm just doing this because everyone else is doing it.
Yeah, definitely. And I totally relate on the podcast front. It's like, this is amazing. I just get to have like really cool conversations. I was thinking about that because I interviewed a friend a few weeks ago. And I was like, you've been my friend for so long. We've worked together on several projects. We talk about business all the time, but we've never had like a conversation about these things. Like me and you may never have had like this formal conversation about your work or your approach. And it's just such a cool platform to like have a reason to reach out to someone and say, I want to learn more about what you do and tell me about it and tell me your approach. So I totally agree. Podcasting is wonderful. You should all start podcasts.
I know.
And actually don't too much competition.
Yeah.
Problem.
Well, and that's like, to me, again, I always look at nature as like the ultimate framework. And like our separation of nature has caused so much pain. But when we really connect with nature, I think we're here to be joyful. I mean, I think we're here to experience all kinds of emotions. Yet nature is so playful and fun and like joyous. And I think when we remember that, and part of that is getting out of scarcity mentality. And again, some things are scarce, so it's nuanced. Like, nothing is all or nothing. But yeah, remembering that health, and this is kind of how we kicked off, it's not about a list of to-dos. It's like, what makes me feel alive? Podcasting makes me feel alive. Being near light makes me feel alive.
Right.
I got a dog this year. Walking him has become one of my health tools because I freaking love him. And it brings me so much joy. And so I think that's what we need to remember and kind of bring back, rather than it being a competition of who has the best adaptogens or like which one to choose, or because I see it. I mean, sometimes it does come in my feed, don't get me wrong, and but remembering that it is about living more, not just stressing less, I think, and living fully, not just the positive stuff, but the hard stuff too, because the hard stuff becomes the most meaningful stuff.
For sure. I think that's a great note to end on, for sure. Do you want to share with everyone how they can find you?
Yeah.
Insatiable Podcast.
Yeah, Insatiable Podcast, wherever fine podcasts like Medium Well are found. And if you want to take the quiz, you can go to alishapiro.com, and right on the homepage is what's your comfort eating style. And so you can find out what your eating habits say about you. And that's probably the best place. And also I'm at Instagram. I do like Instagram, but I curate my feed. I'm at Ali M. Shapiro, and Ali is ALI.
Cool. I'll link all of that up in the show notes as well. Thank you so much, Ali. This has been such a treat. I feel like we could talk for another 6 hours. Maybe we will at some point. Yeah. But thank you so much for taking the time and sharing all your wisdom with us.
Thanks for having me, Sarah, and asking such great questions.
you have it, the episode with Ali Shapiro, holistic nutritionist, integrated health coach, and the creator of Truce with Food. Ali's program, Truce with Food, it's her signature coaching experience. It only runs once a year, and it's now open for registration, Monday, January 21st through January 28th. So it's a really small window. If you're listening, luckily you can get in. The details are available on her website, which I will link up at the bottom of this episode in the show notes. The show notes are always available on my website. It's Sarah Weinreb, my name. You can see it on iTunes.com/podcast/ the number of the episode. So this is 13. So sarahweinreb.com/podcast/13. And I really loved, as I mentioned in the intro, Ali's approach to just, we don't need to complicate this. Like, how do we get to the root of our stress? How do we change our behaviors? How do we navigate these things that are constantly coming up? Because if we're just trying to throw Band-Aids on it, if we're just trying to count calories, if we're just trying to, go to yoga once a week, those are sometimes helpful tools, but they don't get to the core essence of why we're not getting what we want, why we're not making the change that we want. And that really resonated with me. And I'm really excited to think about how this unravels in my life. And really just a quick example of how it affected me so quickly was right after we recorded this episode, like literally right after, which was only 2 days ago from when I'm recording this, I logged on Facebook and I saw that one of my bigger clients, writing clients, shut down like overnight. Like I had multiple deadlines due. They owe me money, all these things. So that was kind of surprising and a little alarming. And I decided to go on Instagram and talk about how this happened. I didn't want to name the client and ask for help of like, if anybody needs some writers, a writer right now, I have a little bit of extra time in my schedule. So I recorded like 4 or 5 Instagram stories and posted it. And immediately, how like sometimes when you post Instagram videos, they take like 10 seconds to post. In that time, I was like, this is my behavior. This is like my avoidant behavior. I'm not sitting with this. I'm not leaning into the discomfort. I'm not trying to turn to myself. And that exact pattern that me and Ali spoke about on the episode of like seeking others' help, seeking others' validation instead of turning inward came out. So I immediately, as soon as they posted, deleted them all. And I emailed Ali and I told her, and it was just such a helpful thing. And it was like immediate reinforcement. So I hope these tools are helpful to you. I hope that you seek out Ali, follow her on Instagram, keep up with her work because it is really unique. It's a really fresh and different voice in the wellness community and in the health community. And she just clearly is so smart, so driven, and has done so much research and has so much clout behind her. So that's our episode with Ali. And if you do love it, if you can screenshot this, tag me, tag Ali, and share your takeaway, share a pattern you're looking to change, whatever that is. If you really feel so excited about Medium Well that you want to rate and review it on the Apple Podcast Store. Is it a store? I don't really know. You don't pay for anything. That would be great. You just write a review. It makes a huge difference in people finding me, and definitely check out Ali's podcast, Insatiable, if you're interested in health and wellness and you're a health dork like I am. So much information there. And then, of course, go back and listen to any episodes you missed over the holiday, anything that tickles your fancy. There's really a wide variety of topics in the Medium Well repertoire already, and we're only 13 episodes in. I'm so glad you're here. Thank you for spending a little time with me today, and I'll see you next Wednesday. We launch episodes every Wednesday. See you then.